Welcome to the London School of Economics. My name is Ricky Burdett. I'm a professor of urban studies and director of a research center called LSE Cities. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all from around the world to our online event called The Response of Major Cities to the Challenges of the 21st Century. It's hosted by two units at the LSE, the LSE European Institute and LSE Cities. I'm absolutely delighted to be chairing this event today and want to welcome our main speaker, Ada Colau, the mayor of Barcelona, who I will introduce more fully in a moment. But before I do, I just want to give you a few housekeeping announcements. The event will be in English. Obviously, I'm speaking English, and in Spanish. Ada will be speaking in Spanish. With live interpretation taking place right now. Make sure that you've selected the language you would like to listen to by clicking on the globe item at the bottom of your screen, the world globe item, and click the language you want to follow. So please do that now. For those of you who are Twitter users in the audience, the hashtag for today's event is @LSE COVID-19. It's part of a wider series of events. It's going to be recorded and hopefully will be made available as a podcast as long as we don't have any technical difficulties. The event will last 1 hour. It's now just after 5 p.m. in London. I don't know where you are in other parts of the world, but if you're in Barcelona, it's an hour later. And we will end at 6 p.m. London time. The way the evening will be organized is that after my introduction of the mayor, she will speak for around 10 minutes or so. Ada and I will then have a conversation through the interpreters on a number of the points that she will have raised. And then we come to the final and very, very important section in the tradition of the London School of Economics, which is to get questions from you, the international audience, which I will read out a select number of questions to Ada, and she will then respond. There will be time for a number of those questions, but obviously don't be upset if yours are not posted immediately, because there will be more than we have time for. So that is the format of the evening. Even when you send your questions in, keep them short, and please say what your name is and ideally what your affiliation is or what city you're communicating from. So Ada, it's really a great pleasure to welcome you to the LSE. As you know, and I know, there's a long history of connection between our institution and your city, a long and deep connection of respect. In fact, in the case of those of us who are urbanists, it goes back to the 20 plus years ago when Pascual Maragall, who was your predecessor at the time, of course, of the 1992 Olympics, and the then head of the London School of Economics, the sociologist Tony Giddens, were connecting and in fact ended up creating a series of events which led to the urban age, and a series of discussions where Ada Colau, in fact, took part only through a few years ago in Venice, and we were delighted she was there. Just one last thing to say is that the city of Barcelona is the only city in the world to win an architecture prize, the most prestigious architecture prize, obviously said from London. In 1999, they won the Royal Gold Medal, beating every single architect in the world because they had done so many wonderful things accumulated over time. These are fundamental aspects, the relationship between physical form and social transformation that Ada has maintained and continued in her work. Now, Ada is not only the first female mayor in Barcelona's history, she's undoubtedly one of the most progressive in Europe, if not globally. She founded her own party, which then became the name of the party that she now leads in coalition, Barcelona en Comú, which of course speaks for itself. It's about community and participation. And just a year after forming the party, won the municipal elections in 2015 and then was re-elected in 2019. Now, not only is she a key player in her city and her region and in Catalonia and in Spain, but she's also the representative for a global organization called the United Cities and Local Governments, and is the special envoy for relations between cities and the United Nations, something that I think, Ada, we will be collaborating on in the next years. Now, before passing over to her, I just want to frame the nature of her progressive actions by just touching upon 3 or 4 areas where she's been incredibly active in both administrations. And interestingly, the language of even some of her policies speak for themselves. And I think that's very, very important. I mean, for example, she not only has a party which talks about communal and collective action, but she's set up an institute for municipal housing. I hope that Sadiq Khan, our mayor in London, is listening to that. She's been very attentive to managing the tensions between tourism, which is at the heart of the economy, of course, of Barcelona, but the needs of local people. So has addressed questions of Airbnb, etc. She set up an anti-evictions unit, literally called that, anti-evictions unit. It says what's in the tin very clearly, to protect people who've been threatened by private sector landlords who have a major control of some of the properties in the cities. And we'll hear about many of those policies and initiatives in her talk today. I think the other key phrase that comes to me from knowing what she's been doing over the years, and we'll hear about today, is the whole notion of neighborhood plans, that you can't run a city without bringing people with you at the local scale. And I think you've been, Ada, to hundreds of meetings in the different neighborhoods to hear what people need and try to help them actually implement them. So with that as context, I would like, Ada, to invite you to talk to our global audience. And once again, thank you for taking part in this event. Ada, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ricky. Really, thank you for this invitation. It's a real honor for me, and I'm very excited. You've already mentioned a lot of the points that I wanted to address, so I'll try not to speak for too long, so there's time for a dialogue and conversation. You said in your introduction that I'm the first female mayor of Barcelona, and I'd like to remind you that this is quite an anomaly. In a democratic country, in a democratic city, it's very unusual for a woman not to lead over this 40-year period, especially given that Barcelona is a very progressive and innovative city. So it does strike us as quite strange. But not only am I the first female mayor, but I also have a very progressive and social approach. That's the first time anyone with my profile has been in this role. I'm also working class. I have no relationship with the elite, the political elite, the economic elite, which is something that has never been seen before. So not only was I the first female mayor, but I was also the first activist from a working class background that had absolutely no relationship with the political elites. And the entire group that I stood for really was pushing for change, for political change. We didn't just want to substitute those who were in the administration before. We wanted to create transformation and innovation and really address the needs of the citizens who are asking for change and political transformation. And I think that's really key. And this is not only important for people and what they represent. We really wanted this change to become part of the political agenda with priorities, what is now known as a transformative agenda. When we came into office, we put a number of elements at the heart of our policy. These were topics that were being dealt with before, but they were on the fringes. Things like accommodation, housing, which you've mentioned yourself. This is something that was completely dominated by the private sector and property speculators, even though this is a fundamental human right. Things like health, education became a priority for us, investing in neighborhoods, in all neighborhoods in Barcelona, not just in the center. The need to regulate tourism and to diversify the city's economy. We wanted to fight against pollution. Feminism was a major topic for us as well. These were all topics that were at the forefront, but they weren't in our mainstream agenda. They weren't officially part of the institution's focus. And so this change obviously led to a lot of resistance. A lot of people were alarmed by our arrival. They thought that this would be the beginning of a very chaotic period and that it would all be very kind of chaotic and apocalyptic, but that didn't happen, obviously. In fact, this agenda has been imposed in other institutions and there has been a massive change in agenda everywhere. And I think this has to do a lot with the question that you asked regarding this event. In the post-COVID era, what is the role of cities in the 21st century in order to build a post-COVID world? Because I think that the pandemic has confirmed that change in agenda, that change in approach. It's confirmed that now it's really necessary to change our priorities and to highlight that before COVID, our world was in crisis. The crisis isn't necessarily related to COVID. The crisis that we're experiencing was an economic model, a predatory model that destroys our lives, that generates climate change, economic model that's based on capitalism, that promotes the patriarchy, that doesn't deal with the issue of care, because women continue to take on the lion's share of care work and precarious labor. And this generates a lot of inequality, suffering, and cruelty. So that was the major crisis that we were facing. And I think COVID is one of the effects of that because of that relationship between human beings and the planet. And so that confirms, or COVID confirms, that the crisis needs to be dealt with urgently. We need to change our priorities, change our agenda, and change the way we govern. And we're all now talking about global cooperation following COVID, and that's obviously a good thing in order to overcome the pandemic. We can only do this if countries, cities, continents cooperate. We all have to collaborate in order to overcome this crisis, but we also need to cooperate so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past century. And so we can't just talk about recovery, we have to talk about transformation and innovation. And so now I think we're starting a new era. If we're actually intelligent, and I think if humankind can consider itself intelligent, then we need to understand that this crisis is our last opportunity to learn from our mistakes, to start a new era based on cooperation, innovation, and transformation. And so within this context, I'm really excited to talk about the policies that we have been promoting in Barcelona over the last few years, because they form part of this framework against a backdrop of a world in crisis. We want to contribute to that transformation and the new world of the 21st century. And when we think about cities, we often think about buildings, about cement, concrete, infrastructure, cars. Those tend to be the things that come to mind. Pascual Maragall, who I think is the best mayor that we've had in the history of Barcelona. He's one of the best mayors in the world. And internationally, he had a real vocation and wanted Barcelona to be so well known on the world stage. Well, Maragall really insisted on this idea. He believed that the city was the people. If there are no people, then there is no city. So the city is made up of a lot of different things, but if there are no people, then there isn't really a city. And so I think we need to go back to that idea. We need to humanize the city. We need to reclaim those kinds of policies and urban planning policies that are based on people. We need to consider the priorities of the urban agenda and think about humankind as something very diverse, because neoliberal, a patriarchal society that the cities have been designed by white men who have prioritized work. Cars obviously have a major role in this. And so men obviously are part of the cities of the past and of the future, but women should be present too. We also have girls and boys and disabled people and older people and people from different countries and backgrounds. And those people have been made invisible or marginalized in urban planning. And so I think when we reinvent this post-COVID world, we need to, this is something we obviously have to do, and we have this opportunity now to have a more humanist approach, to put people at the very heart of our policies. And we also need to have this feminist view of humankind as something very diverse, and that will make the future much more interesting. So I think we can perhaps, if this comes up in the questions, go into this in more detail, but I'd like to consider humankind, one aspect of humankind, which is children. And I am going to take you through Barcelona through the eyes of a child, because this is one of the axes, one of the pillars that we've prioritized in our city strategy. Donucci said that if we create a city that's better for children who systematically have been made invisible or have been discriminated against in urban planning, as if they weren't citizens or if they don't have rights, then if we are able to make a better city for children, then the city will be better for everyone in general. And so this is the perspective that I'd like to consider. Let's look at a city through the eyes of a child. It has to be a city where we can play, a city where children can grow. It also has to be a city where people can dream. And so with this context, I would like to describe some of the policies that we are developing in the city. And this is a city in which children are able to play in the streets. It's a city that's safe. It's a city with life. And this might sound obvious, but it's something that we should really think hard about, because capitalist cities over the last century have been places that are unsafe for children. I remember when I was younger, I would play in the streets with other children who lived nearby, whereas now as a mother, I'm scared for my children to play out in the streets. So obviously this is a huge step backwards, and in order to make progress, we need to reclaim the streets for children and make those spaces safer. We need to make spaces pedestrianized and create green spaces for people. From where I'm sitting, the City Hall of Barcelona has a main square and a secondary square next to City Hall. We have one that is institutional. The second square up until now was a car park. We've taken away all the cars now, and we've created a space where children can play. And it's filled with children and families who previously were invisible. And it seemed almost as if they didn't live in the city center because you could only find tourists there. So we've taken away cars, and life has sprung up. It's taken over those public spaces. This is just a very specific example that gives us an indication of how we can transform the entire city. And so the idea of superblocks came about based on this. It's the idea that approaches the city from the perspective of green spaces, pedestrianization, getting rid of cars to create space for life so that children can play, so that older people can walk around safely, so that local residents can meet up in the street, so that local businesses can also sell more, because this is obviously something that helps the economy when streets are pedestrianized. So it's a win-win situation when in an urban setting, we're able to reduce traffic. And within this general strategy, which is called Superilla Barcelona, and is also an extension of Sardar's strategy. He wanted to make the city larger, healthier, so that there were more democratized quality and larger green spaces for people. And those spaces that Sardar had already considered, spaces that would be larger for people to live in healthily, they filled up with cars, which is something that Sardar had not contemplated. So we want to bring back his focus. And in the 21st century, we want squares and streets that are greener and healthier for people. And as part of this general strategy, there's another strategy which is about protecting schools. We believe that schools in a democratic city, schools are the most important infrastructure. That's undeniable, because that's where our citizens are prepared, are educated, and it's where our children, who we love so much, spend a lot of their time. And so we need to be able to ensure equal opportunities for them. So these are this is democratic infrastructure, democratic facilities for them. And in the 20th century, schools were mainly invisible. In a school, you're able to very easily identify where car parks are, because they have a lot of signs, and it's very clear where you can park your car, but it's not clear where a school is, for example. It's almost as if a school is a place where you drop off your kids and forget about them. But we wanted to transform this vision of schools. We want to protect schools. We want to make them safe so that children and families can go in and out very safely. We also want them to be places where there's life. We want to create squares in front of schools for communities where we can strengthen democratic life. We'll also be using schools as climate havens. There is a program that we've launched so that school playgrounds are full of greenery, and they turn into a green haven when we have heat waves, for example. There are other initiatives that we're launching in order to help our schools as well. As I said, this is something great for children, for older people as well, for local establishments. And the idea is to strengthen the social fabric of the city, the community. This is something that we need in order to make the city more resilient, because a resilient city obviously needs infrastructure, like, for example, uh, rain collection infrastructure. And we also need other kinds of infrastructure like software, not only hardware, but software, and a way to strengthen social relations. During the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the neighborhoods that have reacted best are those that had a community life, where neighbors knew each other and helped each other, where they worried about older people, they would take them food, for example. And that is also a sign of a resilient society, not only a city that has good infrastructure. So that community dimension, the importance of schools and public spaces, is the foundation. That is how we're going to create a city where we can play, a city that is safe, and a city where people want to be. We also want a city that can grow, and where young people, children, can grow and develop as people. We want them to be free and autonomous in our democratic city. And for that to be possible, we need to promote a sustainable economy, a green economy with sustainable mobility, and environment, sustainability, and economy are not contradictory aspects, as has been said to us for many years. In fact, it's the complete opposite. The only way we can ensure prosperity is by developing a sustainable economy which doesn't fight against the planet, but actually protects it. So environmentally friendly buildings is something that we've prioritized over the year. Sustainable mobility, public transport, all of this allows us to re-industrialize the city and create a useful economy for the 21st century in line with the objectives that we have. An economy that offers this kind of future also creates good quality jobs, protects the environment as well. But in order to grow, we need knowledge and culture, because in cities of the 21st century, education is not enough just for equal opportunities. Culture is also crucial in order for real equal opportunities. And so in our urban planning, we're also prioritizing how we strengthen our ecosystem. Barcelona is proud to have universities that are world-renowned. And so in collaboration with these universities, we're working on urban planning in order to strengthen and create new research teams in biodiversity, in other strategic sectors like technology, for example. And this is key for our city, like at 22 at, which is a technological district, which was innovative at its time, and that we are updating now by combining technology with accessible housing, affordable housing, and green infrastructure, because we don't want neighborhoods that just specialize in one single activity. We want all neighborhoods in the city to be places where people can live and work. This has to be a city in which life is at the very heart of everything. And I can go into more detail in this if you like. I'm just going to move on to the third aspect, which is that we want children to grow up in a city where they can dream, about a better future, a braver future, a more innovative future, a future that's actually possible. And for this, the city needs to be fairer, and it has to guarantee basic rights. And we have to be able to renew that basic social pact that social democracy has weakened over the last few years. We need to strengthen basic public services and really focus on strong public leadership when it comes to utilities and public infrastructure that allows people to have a decent life. I'm talking about education, health, housing, culture. But we need to do this not only with a social justice perspective, and Barcelona, with our government over the last few years, has become the city with the greatest amount of social investment over the last few years. We've really prioritized social investment, but the idea is not only to increase social investment, we need to do this along with innovation. We want a fair and democratic city. We don't want to create a welfare city. So in terms of social housing, Barcelona is creating more rented social housing than ever. We are developing thousands of public social housing with that institute that you mentioned previously, but not only that, we've also created this anti-eviction unit, which we started from scratch, because eviction is actually a state competence, but because eviction happens in our city, it's our main concern. And so we created something that didn't exist before, which is this mediation unit, which has stopped over 10,000 evictions, which is huge given that we don't have that competency, but we've been able to mediate and stop those evictions. Or we've offered an alternative. We've created a property discipline unit, which involves bringing an end or trying to control property speculation and establishing the right to housing as a basic human right. And so banks and vulture funds that speculate, that have empty properties, that harass tenants, have been subject to large fines. We've also expropriated buildings in order to turn them into social housing. And this is just one or two examples of our housing policy that has a social justice focus. We've also strengthened public leadership by creating a public utilities company, electricity company. In Spain, we have a liberalized utilities market, but there is a monopoly which generates a lot of profit by speculating with basic public service. And so we've set up a company that offers 100% green renewable energy. And today in Barcelona, the electricity and the lighting in the cities runs off green energy that has been municipalized. We've been able to reduce energy bills for families and for public street lightings using 100% green energy. We've created this utilities company. We also have a dentist service that is municipal. Public health is obviously available to everyone, but often dentistry isn't covered, and it's important for people to have dental care in order to be able to access work and education. And this was something that wasn't covered by public healthcare, but we've created a municipal dentist service which is now available to thousands of people who previously couldn't afford to go to the dentist. So now they have their dental health guaranteed. There are many other examples that I could mention here. We've invested in neighborhoods with the highest inequality coordinators, we've invested 300 million euros in education, in culture, in order to empower those neighborhoods and to strengthen their talent and their abilities and skills. And despite all of that, the economic indicators have not dropped. In fact, they've increased. We're still at the top of many rankings. We're the 8th best city to live in. We are the 2nd most important city after London when it comes to attracting technology investment. We're among the 25th most competitive cities in innovation. There are many other indicators that I could cite which confirm that Barcelona continues to still be very attractive. But now, when a private investment is being considered, if this is an investment that will create value and is prepared to work with the city, we make it easy for them. But if it's an investment that is about speculating, property speculation, and trying to squeeze profits out of the city and with no positive outcomes for the city, then we will oppose that. And in Barcelona, we've said often that we don't welcome property speculation. We want to generate value and strengthen strategic sectors that will allow us to develop a city that focuses on children. And so now I would like to give you the floor again, and perhaps we can start a debate. And I'd like to end with this image. For many years, the city has grown up with many dystopian images. We consider perhaps the future being full of robots and controlled by technology and with a great deal of inequality. And there have been many films, in fact, that depict a very cruel, dehumanized city. And this is something that perhaps came to the fore in the 20th century, but in Barcelona, we want to be a human city. We want to be innovative and transformative, sustainable as well. We want this to be the image of the cities of the 21st century. So there's still a long way to go, but we are very excited about what the future brings, and we're convinced that this is our way forward. And so now I'd like to give you the floor so you can start the debate.
Well, Ada, and I hope you can hear me, and please, those of you who are now hearing me in English, please press the button if you want to hear me in Spanish. I mean, what is very clear is that, you know, there's a vision and a passion which has driven you and your colleagues to where you are. And you talk about the importance of effectively transforming the model, right? Patriarchal, market-driven, let's call it a prevalent model out there. And in many ways, cities, and you know this very well from your international work, are at the front line of change. But, and this is a question, I don't want to be negative, but I think you have experience, and maybe you can share also with our audience, where are the frustrations sometimes? Because your narrative of the city of for the child is very powerful, because you're thinking through not a year, you're thinking through 80 years of life from what the public space is like, etc. And you mentioned the car, and we all know the tension between, let us say, creating a place that you can play, which is safe, and a car driving through it. Now, you can control that to a degree as mayor, but you can't necessarily, if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, control commuting traffic from the region. You know, can you share with us, where have you been able to intervene as the mayor of a city which is always smaller and has a more limited budget, of course, than in your case, Catalonia or the state? Where are the tensions, and where would you like to see most change at the level of governance?
It's true that it's not just a Barcelona issue. This is a problem that all cities have. And as you know, we take part in different networks, all sorts of different networks, Metropolis, C40, UCLG. We share many of these networks. In fact, we're on many of these networks with London. And we often talk about the same problems, that we have these same issues. We concentrate most of the population across the planet. Most people live in cities, more and more people living in cities. And the great challenges around technology, around the green transition of the economy, reducing emissions, fighting inequalities, all of these affect cities, and we are the main front line from that point of view, as you said. But we have governance which on a worldwide level really is focused on central administrations, and they have most of the powers for intervention. They have most of the resources also. In Spain, for example, cities have a maximum 15% of public resources, but yet we have to deal with everything. We have to deal with everything because citizens don't know whether the city council is responsible for one thing, or the region is responsible for the other, or the state is responsible for another. Basically, individual citizens want solutions to their problems. So I always say that city council is like the mother in politics, because everyone has this expectation that the mother will always be there, that their mum will be there. And if you mess up on one day, you're in trouble, because how could your mother possibly not be there for you on that day? And so you need to be responsible for everything, even if you don't have the necessary resources and even if you don't necessarily have the competences. But that's beautiful in a way. And that's actually something I find very wonderful about municipalism, because it is the politics of the everyday, and it's the politics of creativity and innovation. Many of the things that we can't do due to the lack of competences or resources, we do through innovation and cooperation. And cooperation is key there between cities, between the municipal institution and citizens. I'm thinking of housing, for example. With housing, we have public housing, but we can also try to sort out the market using our different urbanistic tools through urbanism. And we can also reach agreements with businesses that want to be part of the solution. So we've created a metropolitan company, for example, that's building these thousands of flats. We provide public space, and the companies will offer rental properties which are under the price, the market price. So there's collaboration there with the private market, because we can't do everything on ourselves. We're not going to achieve everything just through our own actions, through municipal actions. These are huge challenges that we're facing. And I think it's very inspiring. Precisely, Machucato talks about about this particular topic. And I think it's crucial, that kind of approach. We have huge objectives, huge goals, and one administration, one city, one country can't resolve these alone. So we must certainly work together for these great goals that we have. So mobility, yes, it's crucial, and we do act bravely within our city. We're trying to reduce traffic, we're trying to transform, we're trying to support cycling, we're trying to promote public transport. But most cars that drive around Barcelona come from outside Barcelona. So we need infrastructure. We need trains, public transport infrastructure that is much better. And that is basically the competency of the Generalitat, the regional government, or the state. And so we need to reach agreements. We need to reach pacts. But what we can't do is not act and wait for others to act for us. And that's something we've always said in Barcelona. We're going to move forward with traffic reduction, and we hope that that puts pressure on these other administrations that have larger budgets, who have greater capacity to intervene. And so we want to put pressure on them to act. But what we can't do is just simply sit back and wait for others that have the competences to act. So we have to act ourselves, and we need to do everything we can, everything that's possible within our city, to improve things. At the same time as we have dialogue, we reach agreements, and we put pressure on, we lobby for other administrations to do their part also.
Ada, let's start by my asking you some of the questions which are coming from the audience. Rasha Murtada, who's a student at University College London, is obviously reacted to your very interesting comments about kids and about children in the city. And she wants to know, how do you encourage their safe and effective participation? How do you listen effectively? And maybe you could say a little bit more about your neighborhood plans and how they work. Just give us one or two examples. And I'm going to ask you to be short in your answers so I can ask you lots of questions.
I'll try to be brief. Well, to listen to children, well, how do we do that? In different ways. We have public hearings, you might say, within the City Council, and schools might prepare a particular topic. So they might prepare sustainability as a subject area, and they bring proposals to the City Council, and then we respond to those proposals provided by children. When I go to the different neighborhoods, I always visit a school. For me, that is a key facility, and so I always make sure that a school is included in those visits. When we had the pandemic, in the most difficult months, March, April, when we had full lockdown, when we all needed to be shut in our houses, that was awful, because the adult-centric management of the pandemic left children enclosed in their homes, and they weren't even allowed to go out for 5 minutes a day for months. And that was terrible, awful for children. And they were the great forgotten group of this whole management of the pandemic. We could go out and take the rubbish, go shopping and buy some food, or we could walk our pets. But children simply didn't exist, it would seem, and they were stuck inside. And as a city council, we demanded that our children be freed, and we gave children the possibility to send videos to me, and so I as mayor would then respond weekly. So because we wanted the HAM to have direct communication with the mayor, because we really felt that they had been made invisible and they needed to be listened to. And so there's examples of some practices that we try to incorporate in our policies when it comes to designing a change, for example, of a square. We think of a playground, and when we do that, we ask children from the neighborhood or from a local school what they think we should do and how we should go about this transformation. So we really try to incorporate them, and we consider them to be fully fledged subjects, fully fledged citizens. Currently, we have a participatory process to invest 30 million euros in neighborhoods. And though in the elections only those over 18 can vote, in this participatory process, we have people from 14 taking part so that they can help make decisions on priority investments in the different neighborhoods. So that's a few examples. In terms of the neighborhood plan, these are interventions that are designed alongside local residents. And so there might be a prioritization of schools, for example, in certain very vulnerable neighborhoods. Then we support artistic, cultural teaching and education, for example, music teaching in those schools. We try to really offer emotional and social support. We want to make sure that teachers can act as teachers and that there is additional support for other areas so that teachers don't have to take everything on their own shoulders. We try to improve the environment, so squares and places where people meet in neighborhoods. So those are a few more of the different measures, but the key is that we always prioritize local residents through a participatory process.
Okay, Ada, there are about 40 questions coming through, but I won't ask you all 40 of them. One question is nearly predictable, but very interesting to all of us. This is from Barbara Jameson from an organization called European Cities Marketing, and it's about tourism and on the fact that many cities are focusing on attracting good tourists, and given that tourism creates jobs and wealth, etc. What's your definition of a good tourist?
Well, sustainable tourism is the kind of tourism that we want, that it can happen alongside the everyday life of people across all neighborhoods. When we came into power in the city council, there was a complete lack of control and imbalances. Thousands of tourist apartments, which were illegal, actually, which we've closed down. We've really imposed some order there because there was complete disorder. So there were these illegal flats, which were creating economic problems. They don't pay taxes, they create unfair competition, but also that they were leading to speculation around housing. And that meant that we were losing homes for people to live in, and we were having more speculation around tourist properties. So we stopped that, and we wanted to ensure that everything was ordered and there wouldn't be speculation in the different neighborhoods. So for us, that was a key objective. And we didn't want everything to be too focused in the center of our city. We wanted to spread it across the whole of the city and the region, actually, not just the city itself. So it's really a case of working with private stakeholders as well. And we actually asked tourists, we're an open city, we like to be visited, and not only for the economic advantages, but also because this is part of our identity, we like to be visited, but that should not endanger life in the city. And the tourists themselves, when we asked them through a survey, they said they liked Barcelona a lot, but what they didn't like was to see so many tourists in Barcelona. And so that they weren't experiencing the city in the same way. And I think that is a key indicator. And I think tourists and local residents agreed, we want balance.
And just to follow up myself on this question, does the effect of the pandemic and the closure of any form of tourism and visitors, is it making your life more difficult now to implement some of the very strong ideas you had, because the classic economic argument will be we need to have as many people come in and contribute to via taxes and shopping to the health of the local economy? I'm just curious whether you feel it's become more difficult or not.
Of course, there are economic sectors in the city who have been very damaged by this, especially in the center of the city. It really has been very negatively affected by the lack of tourism. And there, the public policies that we've had have been crucial to ensure that jobs were kept. And I think there has been a social response from the beginning of the pandemic from that point of view. And that's when compared to 2008. So jobs have been protected, and that is absolutely crucial. But now what we need to do, like you say, is work on recovery. So we need to work to get visitors back to our city. But we have an opportunity now, which is to guide that tourism a bit more towards much more sustainable activities. So, for example, linked to the cultural offering in our city, we have a wonderful cultural ecosystem in the city, and we want to reinforce that. And we want the tourism that we recover to be linked to that, the cultural activities, and throughout the year, not only linked to the real summer tourism that we had traditionally, and that weakened us. Actually, it made us vulnerable, that did, because when you depend so much on one single economic activity, which depends on people coming from abroad to visit you or coming from outside to visit you, and it's very much focused on top of that in several months, that makes your economic system very vulnerable. And so we need to make the most of this crisis to diversify much more the economy, and that's something that we're doing, and also to diversify that tourism to make sure it's more sustainable and more balanced across the year and not so focused and concentrated in the summer months.
There's a question from an architect in London called Tom Holbrook, which is very close to the question I would have wanted to ask you, which is in a way connecting the fact that your city has had an extraordinary tradition in the last 30 years of using spatial policies to implement social and environmental change, right? So in that sense, it's not that you're against planning, you see it both in 3 dimensions, but also as a social experiment and as an environmental experiment. What Tom Holbrook is asking is, how can other cities benefit and learn from Barcelona's extensive urban experiments? How can they learn more?
In reality, I think that we do this every day, because Barcelona learns constantly from London, from Paris, from Milan, and from many other cities. And this is reciprocal, I think. Cities, like I said, are used to having to deal with pretty much everything with very few resources. And that makes us very creative, and it makes us very cooperative. And so we are used to, I think, having this diplomatic relationship between cities. There are these relations of cooperation that mean that we're constantly learning from each other. And it means that we visit the different cities, and we have had many different cities be interested in our different policies, the super blocks policy, the traffic reduction, the transformation of urban space, management of tourism, how we've gone about trying to create some order there, how we've worked with the regulations around hotels or these Airbnb, for example. These are global phenomena, digital platforms that it seems don't have to follow local norms, but then actually have a huge impact on our cities. In the case of Airbnb, there's a huge impact on housing, creating great speculation. So we forced them to actually impose some order in what they do and to remove all sorts of illegal flats from their website. And so there's constant exchange of information with Amsterdam, Paris, London, with all sorts of different cities. We're constantly in touch with each other.
Right. No, that's very helpful. I wanted personally just to pick up one of the comments you made right at the beginning of your contribution about, in a way, the potentially positive shift in values that COVID has created, because I think you were nearly optimistic there in the sense that, it's forced us into a corner that we have to look at our world again in a positive way. And you use the word, we need to humanize cities. And of course, we all know that cities can brutalize people rather than humanize them. So if you were to just pick up one or two things that you think you can build on in your administration, but also in your diplomatic work of speaking for cities, as you've just answered a moment ago, what would you see as those positives that you can take away that we've learned because of COVID? I mean, for example, the value system to a degree has changed. I personally would maybe say to you, planning, the concept of planning is, after many years that it was beaten down by central government or other systems, is back in favor. Because if you plan well, you can save people's lives. I wonder what you thought about that.
I think it's true that especially in the first months of the pandemic, there was a great global awareness of the fact that our world was facing a crisis and that significant change was required in our social, economic organization, in our values. And we've had all sorts of experiences in Barcelona. We've seen local residents get organized to help each other, for example, or at the hardest times when Spain, which is considered a developed country from the first world, when it discovered that it was extremely vulnerable, this was a key moment because it was not able to offer or supply the most basic element of protection, which was masks, and that we didn't even have masks for our health professionals. And so that showed us exactly how vulnerable we were with a very radical experience. And so throughout that, through that situation, we were able to cooperate with women who were sewing in their homes, young people who had 3D printers and were able to produce different elements of individual protection in that way, people who were helping us transport things to different hospitals. We created this horizontal network of cooperation in a record period of time. And so we showed ourselves through this concrete experience that we were able to work very differently to achieve our common aims. It's true that after that on the official agenda, that level of awareness, I think, is disappearing little by little, and we start to hear the old messages that we always used to hear from the same old voices from large companies, for example, or from states, and they're already talking about economic recovery in those old terms, as if we hadn't understood or we hadn't learned anything. But the population has had this experience now, and I think people in our cities, well, people are more demanding. They're demanding bravery and they're demanding speed in the fight against pollution and in transforming the urban space, or in the social policies that we have and that prioritize life and care. And so I think, though, yes, there is some resistance, though it's difficult, though it's tough, we have that opportunity now to make progress, civilizing progress. And I think it's our responsibility to make the most of this opportunity.
No, the link which goes through many of the things you've said is a belief in a new social pact, which in the end it was an idea, it was a vision. You got elected, and then you got re-elected. Now, there's a question from Dan Hill in London, and if it's the Dan Hill I know, he's also in Sweden, which is going back to maybe the complexities around government, right? Different levels. And he's referring to the fact in London, we have an interesting situation right now, you probably know this, where the central government is putting enormous pressure on the mayor to reduce costs with public transport. But the city itself has very little ability to raise taxes, has very little fiscal power. So the question is, how do you work with the region and national government to, in a way, resolve some of these possible conflicts?
Well, over the last few years, it's been very difficult. They've been difficult years because here we've had a level of political conflict that's been considerable. There's been a lot of instability. And so for quite some time now in the city, we've felt very much alone, really. When it's come to trying to really promote some of these policies, there's been this sense of being alone because of that political instability on a national level. However, despite that, and like I said previously, we have managed to promote many of these innovative policies, things that weren't being done before. And now I feel optimistic, despite the great complexity and the great difficulty of the current moment. I do feel optimistic because I think that the government, the Catalan government, in this case, the Spanish government, are clear now that now we must cooperate and there must be dialogue, that we need to put aside polarization and tensions that we've had over the recent years. And so I think now we are going to be able to work together much more effectively. There's going to be more cooperation on these policies because they're shared policies in many cases. And they're all thinking also of the far right and the progress being made by the far right in Europe, across the world. If politics is perceived as being a source of more problems and not of solutions, then citizens obviously react against politics, and democracy is weakened. So beyond parties, beyond institutions, more than ever now, this is a time for cooperation. This is time to show that politics is useful in resolving people's problems and putting aside parties, etc., putting aside institutions. I think we all need to really be committed across Europe now to providing stability, to cooperating, and to resolving problems, because if we don't, the far right will grow. And it is growing specifically on the basis of this discourse, this anti-politics discourse, which really weakens our institutions, democratic institutions. And there is a huge danger there that we might have a regression in our democracies. And we can't allow that to happen.
I'm encouraged to see here a city leader be actually positive about collaboration with different levels of governance, because as you know, most times mayors complain that they don't have enough money or enough power. Now, we're coming up to the really final minutes of our event, and I wanted to close by asking a question which in a way goes back to my introduction, the strong links between LSE and London and Barcelona. As you know, Sadiq Khan was re-elected only a few weeks ago. I think you were one of the first mayors to congratulate him on his re-election. There are obviously many conversations, not only this one, some shared agendas, different power structures, different maybe political agendas from the ones in London and the ones facing London as a priority. Housing, of course, being way up there in terms of his agenda. My sort of final question to you is, what do you think Sadiq should steal from you in terms of Barcelona's policy? You know London, and you've discussed these issues, but I mean it in a constructive way. What do you think is maybe one of the more exportable ideas of your administration and your delivery? And then the other way around, what would you like to steal from London? Is there anything that has been done here? There have been major developments on trying to control emissions in terms of cars and controlling traffic, and other attempts at sort of building more housing and other things. So could I ask you to maybe comment on those last two things in the last minute of our conversation? So very short, unfortunately.
Well, for London, it's not a case of stealing or giving each other lessons or anything. We are sister cities and we cooperate on a regular basis already. So we have a very strong relationship with Sadiq Khan, and I think he's an excellent mayor. And as well as that relationship, our teams work together very often on housing, mobility, for example. We are very interested, for example, in terms of mobility, we have a low emissions zone to try and reduce the entry of vehicles that are most polluting, but it's not enough at the moment. So we're very interested to see the whole urban tax concept in London. That's something we certainly would like to look at a bit
that's
more
one thing.
for
And
Barcelona.
what do you think Sadiq Khan should implement in London, which is the Ada Colau model?
Well, like I said, it's really depends on everyday life in London, and I don't know exactly what that's like. I think in terms of social policies, we have innovated a lot. And like I said, we don't only have the strong assistance policy, but we also have a policy to try and achieve public leadership when it comes to crucial rights and crucial assets for people's decent lives. So we have the energy provider, so that there is an alternative to the oligopoly that we had with the large electricity companies. We have this municipal dentistry offer, so for people who can't afford to go to the dentist. And we also have a program to support women, especially single mothers who need time to be able to do their work, etc., and to have a life. And so
I think
we have a program from that point of view too.
I think the Mayor of London would love to be able to also have an impact or control of health, but unfortunately it's not in his portfolio. Ada, we've come to the end of our hour with you. On behalf of the LSE, the European Institute, LSE Cities, and all the audience from around the world that has attended, from India, from Canada, and from Europe, thank you very, very much for sharing your ideas and vision for Barcelona on how to deal with the major challenges of the post-COVID city. Thank you so much, Ada. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the conversation, and we'll continue the conversation another day. Thank you, and a big hug.